To the Point with your host, News Channel 5's Kelly Dunn.
Today, I'm announcing that I will no longer be a candidate for the United States Senate, nor will I seek any office this year or next. Instead, I am rededicating myself to finishing the job you sent me to do here in Florida.
That was the statement that changed the dynamics in the race for the U.S. Senate. Good morning, I'm Kelly Dunn, and the man who shook up the race is our guest on To the Point. He is State Senate President Mike Haridopolos, a Republican from Merritt Island, whose district includes part of our viewing area, actually in Indian River County. And joining me today is my colleague, Michael Williams. Senator, let's get to the point. Explain why you dropped out of the U.S. Senate race so quickly.
Well, it was a very difficult decision to make. After leading the nation in fundraising as a challenger, matching Bill Nelson with about $3.5 million, having endorsement of people like Jeff Atwater, Mike Huckabee, Connie Mack, it looked like all the right things on paper. But my job has to be focused on doing my job as State Senate President. And I realized as we start committee weeks in September, running through session in March, that I could not do the job as I expected to. And so I had to drop out because I need to focus on the job I have today, being Senate President.
You didn't expect that? I mean, going into it, that wasn't something that was evaluated even before you jumped into the race?
No, it's one of the evaluations we made. We thought we could do both, but I realized to beat a person like Bill Nelson, who'll be very difficult to beat, you're going to need to be on the road literally 24 hours a day, much like Marco Rubio did in taking on that race. He was not in office when he ran. That is a big advantage. And I need to do the job I have today, which is leading our state Senate. And I'm proud to say we balanced the budget without raising taxes, and we're moving in the right direction here in Florida.
Senator, you saw a strong start to fundraising, then it dropped off significantly. Some argued, particularly in the Tea Party, that you weren't conservative enough. They criticized you for not ramrodding through an immigration reform bill that would have been much tougher on immigration in Florida, which the Tea Party wanted, said you weren't strong enough to do that, weren't committed enough to do that. How do you respond?
Well, first on the fundraising front, we raised as much money as Bill Nelson the first 2 quarters, $3.5 million. I think I was number 5 in the entire country with over $900,000 last quarter, building on the 2.6 we raised the first quarter. But as far as immigration reform, we passed a bill in the Senate that did 3 things. One is it denied illegal aliens state benefits. Second, it denied illegal aliens using workforce boards to actually find a job. And finally, if you're a convicted criminal, you'll be deported from the country if it's a nonviolent crime, and you'd be serving your time, then deported if it's a violent crime. We passed that in the Senate. Unfortunately, the House did not take it up, so we felt we met that criteria. But most importantly, we had that vote, and we're hopeful the House will take it up next year.
How strong is the Tea Party in Florida? How much did their opposition affect any of your decision?
Well, what affected my decision was, again, looking at the job I had at hand. Could I serve both? And I simply couldn't. I thought I could. I really did, especially with all the endorsements and support and accomplishments this session. But the Tea Party is doing a good job. They're focusing on the right kind of issues, financial issues, and I think you'll find that my let's just say, accomplishments stack up very well.
But you didn't think it was, if you didn't have their support, you wouldn't have been able to win, and that was something that was
I felt very
factored
good
in?
about where the Tea Party was. I had open communications with them. We had a balanced budget. We did not raise taxes, did not raise fees, and what they're talking about right now in Washington is cut, cap, and balance, right? That's what we did in Tallahassee this year, and part of the process was just getting out there. Unfortunately, some of my own Republican opponents said some nasty things that I was not able to rebut until I got on the road, but once we got in front of folks and talked about cut, cap, and balance, what we did in Tallahassee, we saw a lot of movement coming our way.
But again, to the question whether your heart was really into Tea Party politics, at one point you said you opposed the Ryan plan, which would have essentially turned Medicare into a voucher program for people under 55 in the years to come. You were the only Republican Senate hopeful at the time to do that. And people said that immigration, even though you discussed how you pushed it through the Senate, all this showed that they didn't have the ability or the desire to be perhaps as far to the right on some issues as some wanted you to be.
Well, again, I did not support the Ryan plan in full. The Medicare provision was important to me because every one of us pay in every single paycheck we ever earn for Medicare. This is not a welfare program. And so that one provision I was uncomfortable with. But the other aspects are solid because they're pro-growth, pro-job creation, and I supported those. When you run for office, you have to be candid with people. And I felt like Medicare is not a welfare program. It's something that you and I pay for. And for a person to pay in for 47 years and then have something dramatically different once they retired, I felt was not the right way to go.
But it did put you out of line with a lot of conservative voices. Does that speak to where the dialogue in this country is right now, that a position you thought was eminently moderate did not achieve traction with some?
Well, again, it's all hyperbole at this point. I hope in Washington they'll do what we did in Tallahassee. We balanced the budget, didn't raise taxes, didn't raise fees. In fact, lowered taxes by over $300 million. But it's kind of sad what's happening right now in Washington. They just continuously point fingers when what we did in Tallahassee was dramatically different. And that's what I wanted to offer as a U.S. Senate candidate, a person who didn't just kick down barns, but a person who constructed and built things. And that's what we did in Florida this year.
You talked about being candid just a few moments ago, yet you did not disclose your finances on those disclosure forms and were admonished by your fellow Republicans. Why not?
Well, I thought I had filled them out correctly. It was brought to my attention that I did not. I sat down with the Ethics Commission, and we filled them out correctly to their full satisfaction. And two things came from it. One is that every dollar I ever earned was on those sheets of paper. And second is there's no conflicts, meaning the business dealings I had, none were with anybody who did business with the state. Again, I made a mistake in that. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we fixed it, and now it is behind us.
Senator, many say they're put off by politics because it's do as I say, not as I do. At one point, you accepted $152,000 for writing a book about the history of the legislative process from Brevard Community College. A lot said that was just a sweetheart deal. And then when we're talking about being tough on spending money, why do people in your position benefit from the largesse, essentially, of taxpayers?
Well, that's a fair question, Mike. And as we talked about before the show started, I've been teaching in the classroom for almost 20 years. I had taught at the college for over 10 years when they offered me a deal in the sunshine, approved by the teachers union. For over 4 years, I'd be paid a little less than $40,000 a year to work with the college, one of the requirements being to write a book. And I'd invite both of you to look at the book. It describes what it's like to really run for office and what it's like to really be in office. Because as a teacher myself, people just read about the book version. I wanted to give a real understanding of what it takes and what really goes on.
In this climate, yes or no, do you wish you just said no to the money, given the climate about expenditures in the state and the spending of money?
Well, again, I think at 20/20 hindsight, a lot of things could change. But this was done in the sunshine. Everyone was aware of it, including the college in the sunshine. It was well documented in my hometown newspaper many years ago when this took place. And of course, in the U.S. Senate race, some people want to use it political fodder, and I respect that. But I would also recommend people to read the book. We need to make politics more understandable so the hyperbole doesn't carry the day.
Tell us about your goals for the next legislative session. What do you want this time next year to say, I accomplished this year?
Well, first, I do want to go back and what did we accomplish last year? We balanced the budget without raising taxes. We also put a spending cap on the ballot so when the economy recovers, we don't overspend. We took on the welfare program known as Medicaid so that we have a more flexible system that's patient-friendly. We took on welfare and saying you have to pass a drug test or lose benefits. And also, finally, we required state workers to actually pay for their retirement. That's the same kind of agenda we need for next year. Because what was the beneficiary of that? The state. Our credit rating is up because we balanced the budget without raising taxes. And of course, this year we're coming in, instead of with a $4 billion shortfall, we have a slight surplus. That's being fiscally responsible, and that's what we need to continue to do, because that will create jobs, in my opinion.
Senator, how do you sell, though, in 2012 and what will be a contentious year that the Republican Party in Florida is a friend of the middle class? Education cutbacks? A lot of people upset about having to contribute, state workers I'm talking about, to their pension program. Medicaid, they say it's an untried program pushing people into these HMO-style programs. Do you worry the Republican Party will find itself on the wrong side of the pocketbook anger next year?
Well, I think elections are a long way off. But we felt we need to do what's right. The 5 things I just spoke about, I spoke about when I took the oath of office as Senate President. I said, this is what we like to accomplish, and we did all those. I hope that people are looking for, this is what you promise, this is what you deliver. I think 2008 was about hope and change. I hope 2012 is about leadership and accomplishments and making promises and keeping promises. But we have to balance our budget first, and that's how we can right our economy. And once we do that, then we can put more money back into education, transportation, and economic development.
With you out of the race now, do a little handicapping. Who do you think is most likely to win? Who do you think is most likely to gain the supporters that had already backed you when you first announced?
Well, I would not be surprised if another person gets in the race because of the resources I had and, of course, the endorsements and the accomplishments. A lot of people kind of set out the race. I expect another high-quality candidate to get in, and I wouldn't be surprised if that person is the most successful.
Any hints you want to drop?
Yeah.
You're plugged in all over the state. You're thinking of somebody.
You know, I've got
Come
a few
on, tell
people
us
in mind. Look, I think Alan West would be a fantastic candidate. I think Tom Rooney would be a fantastic candidate.
Have you
I think
spoken
Connie
to
Mack.
both of them?
I have not talked about this. They were kind enough to give me a call. But I think to beat Bill Nelson will be very difficult.
I want to be clear. Has Alan West indicated to you that he would at least consider a Senate run, or Tom Rooney?
They're both kind enough to call me and said, wish you the best. Again, we need a first-class candidate in the race, and I'm hopeful that first-class candidate will get in the race.
Under the law, you can keep the $3.5 million you raised in campaign contributions. What will you do with that money?
Well, we're following every procedure. Some of the money will be returned because that's the general election money that we collected, and the others will be returned on a pro rata basis if people ask for it back.
Just back to this political handicapping, a year out, which I know is impossible to do, but you've got Hasner, Lemieux, Miller, all of them, and I know she didn't mention any of them. What do you think of the people already throwing their hat in the ring in the GOP side?
I'm glad they're in the race, but I think we need a high-caliber candidate that's well-known across the state. Look,
and you're saying
dream,
those three aren't?
What I'm saying is I'd love to see Jeb Bush, for example, get in the race. That would be a real shot in the arm. I think he'd for sure defeat Bill Nelson because he's a man of accomplishment, and Bill Nelson, candidly, has not done a very good job for Florida in the United States Senate.
All right, State Senate President Mike Haridopolos, thank you very much for being here. We're going to continue to follow your work in the Senate and your political career.
Thank you,
for your
Kelly.
time.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for being with us.
Coming up next, our roundtable will take an in-depth look at that race for the U.S. Senate in Florida. Time now for our roundtable, and joining us are Brian Crowley, author of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com and political analyst for News Channel 5, and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, and another analyst for us, Dr. Robert Watson. Thank you, gentlemen. It's good to have you back, Dr. Watson. It's been a while.
I missed you all.
That's
it's been
right.
a long time.
I'm glad you're here.
Having withdrawal.
Okay, let's hear the comments about what you heard.
Well, I think there are a lot of folks who believe that the reason the senator dropped out of the race are not exactly as he has described it, that he suddenly discovered that the jobs were too tough. I think there's a lot of people out there who think there may be something else. As we know, next month he's supposed to give some depositions in the criminal investigation of former GOP state executive chairman Jim Greer,
who allegedly used donations on himself.
Exactly,
hundreds of thousands of dollars worth.
And nobody has suggested at this point that Senator Haridopolos has done anything wrong, but you have to wonder, you know, the very process of going through a deposition is not a good thing to have to go through in the middle of a campaign. So perhaps that's one of the reasons that people are speculating anyway that he got out. I think another interesting aspect of his comments was while he certainly didn't show any love for Adam Hasner or George Lemieux, the two other candidates in the race, he's kind of joining this, and McAllister. There's this growing chorus of people that keep mentioning Alan West, and as much as he keeps talking about how he's not interested in running in the U.S. Senate, I think it's interesting that his name in recent weeks keeps coming up.
Was he conservative enough for the politics of the day?
Well, I thought he raised a good point, and that was he was very successful in terms of his fundraising. He's the Senate president, and yet he was perceived as not conservative enough. The point I've made on this show before is the political center in Florida has shifted dramatically to the right. Republicans have veto-proof supermajorities in both chambers, most conservative governor, potentially the most unpopular governor in the country, all the statewide cabinet offices. The political center has shifted, and nobody would say that this guy is the Tea Party darling. Hasner seems to be fighting for that particular role. I think part of the question is not who's in this race, but who's not in it. Not only Jeb, but Connie Mack, a lot of the big-name Republicans that could have probably had a better shot of beating Nelson are not running. But let's say this. This race is going to be fascinating. Several national political organizations have already identified this as potentially the tightest, most important, most intriguing in the country. The Republicans need to pick up 4 Senate seats. 4 Senate seats. And the Democrats are defending 23 seats. The Republicans are defending only 10. 5 of the Democratic seats are open, and of all of them, this is probably one of the big ones the Republicans would like to get. Nelson's the last statewide serving Democrat. So the temptation would be too much, I think, for someone like Haridopolos.
So does Lemieux, or I mean, who does benefit the most? Would Lemieux benefit the most, do you think, with the Haridopolos?
You know, I don't think it's really clear at this point that either candidate benefits the most. Yeah. The benefit from Mike Haridopolos, who was the only of the existing candidates before he got out, the benefit of him getting out is that many people believe is that it narrows the race between Hasner as the hard right conservative Republican candidate, and George Lemieux, who that same group are very determined to paint as still a Charlie Crist moderate, maybe secretly a Democrat kind of candidate. And I think that's, so it certainly narrows the race, and some would argue that the primary voter is a very conservative voter, and because that primary voter is a very conservative voter, it benefits Hasner.
Yeah. Very briefly, I mean, I think the wish list for any Republican is that Jeb Bush would enter. Jeb Bush has said he's not getting in the race. You think he is? Yes or no?
I would say no, but
and Alan West,
it's a winnable race for him, I think, if he were to jump in.
And Alan West is the name, you know, they listen to that name float up. Do you think he'll be enticed to do it?
I think that he's sitting on $1.5 million, and he's raised more money than the two statewide Senate candidates. He's raised more money for a congressional district. The Tea Party loves him. The Tea Party is going to help decide who that candidate is. If Alan West wants it, it's his.
I do think it benefits Lemieux, because Lemieux is now the establishment candidate, if you will. John McCain, Susan Collins, very powerful U.S. senators are holding fundraisers for the guy. Bob Dole's old fundraiser is having fundraisers for him. So he becomes kind of the centrist establishment candidate, whereas before he had to split that, I think, with Haridopolos.
Okay, in just a moment, the first ad that's directed at the man that all of these Republicans want to knock out of the race, Bill Nelson. We'll be back to talk about that in a moment. You may have seen them. There are now 2 political ads directed at Senator Bill Nelson. Here's a little bit of one of them.
What we ought to do is we ought to have a pay-as-you-go policy.
Oh, really, Senator? You voted for skyrocketing debt, the failed stimulus, and Obamacare.
Wow.
So how effective a year out?
Well, I think it's, you know, anytime you can help set the argument and frame the debate, it helps your side. And this immediately puts Senator Nelson on the defensive. And it's going to be interesting to see how fast they come back with an ad that tries to counter this ad. I don't think they can afford to sit on the sidelines for very long. You know, this is not just a generic ad taking on Democrats. This is an ad that specifically targets Bill Nelson, and it's very, very early, and and they clearly think they can bruise him.
But Republicans underestimate him at their own peril. I mean, he comes out of the centrist Askew Graham tradition. To your point, Dr. Watson, the center has moved away from people like Bill Nelson, and yet he does have statewide recognition. How much do they underestimate him at their oon peril?
Good point. On paper, Bill Nelson shouldn't lose this race. It shouldn't be competitive on paper. He's been in politics for years. He's won statewide. He's been in the cabinet. He's been in Congress. He was an astronaut, you know, he's a centrist, two full terms. On paper, he shouldn't be beaten. However, the political center has shifted. He's the last remaining Democrat statewide in Florida. It would be a big symbolic victory. Plus, this race doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's going along with the presidential race. So the presidential race will impact the Senate race. The Senate race will impact the presidential race. Secondly, both the Republican and Democratic national committees have said they're throwing all the resources they can into this race. Thirdly, the 527s. These are the issue advocacy groups like we're seeing in that ad, that thanks to Citizens United versus the FEC, the Supreme Court ruling, these groups can spend an unlimited amount of unregulated money. There are thousands of these groups. What bad economy? They're armed to the teeth. The new war chest, millions and millions and millions of dollars are going to be pumped into these. I agree with Brian. It's sort of a mixed deal. On one hand, the conventional wisdom is people don't pay attention to these ads until a month before the election. On the other hand, if they start chipping Nelson's lead away this early, there's this thing we call the Dukakis factor. Michael Dukakis did not answer his critics, and after about 72 hours, Mike, if you throw it on me and I don't answer, it sticks.
Yeah, well, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, it sticks.
I mean, Nelson, he's probably waiting, what, to figure out who's really going to stay in the race, right, before he
Well, I mean, he doesn't have a candidate to run against, so it makes it a little harder. It's easy for the Republicans to target Bill Nelson. But I think the other problem that Bill Nelson may have next year is that Obama, I think at this point, really risks losing Florida. I think Florida is in a great deal of doubt for the state. And you know, a couple of things could happen. If they get to about October of next year and they think they cannot carry this state, The National Democratic Party will leave Florida.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, they did that with Bill Clinton just before the election.
Ohio.
They'll pull the resources out of here, and that doesn't help Bill Nelson.
Well, of course, it's the old saying, it's the economy, stupid. And to say what the impact and barometer and the feeling of that will be a year from now in Florida, where you're going to have a lot of angry middle-class voters, right, wrong, or indifferent about budget decisions made by Republican legislature. I think the whole dynamic there, where do the independents fall, is an unknowable thing in this contentious time. I mean, do you agree? Or, it's like reading tea leaves right now. No pun intended.
No, it really is. It really is. And I think that there's more questions than answers at this point. The Republicans in Florida are almost running as if they were the minority party. They're sort of complaining about things when they have a majority, so that should advantage Nelson. One quick last point. Advantage Bill Nelson. It could be a crowded, rough Republican primary. Whichever Republican wins this thing is going to be battered, bruised, bloodied, and broke. Nelson has over 6 million, so he could be ready to go for the general election. So we shouldn't count him out quite yet.
And we'll be back to wrap it up after this. And we always like to end with our Crowley closer. So, Mr. Crowley, you have the floor.
Well, you know, last week we talked about Alan West going a little over the top with his response to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We have another example of going over the top. Lois Frankel starts a website called West Hates Women. That's not true. It's nonsense. Nobody believes that Alan West hates women. Another over-the-top episode.
And it's just going to get uglier.
Yeah. Wow. And
Stay
we're
tuned.
still in
Something
August
to look
2011.
forward to. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Robert Watson, Brian Crowley, and Michael Williams for joining us on To The Point. And thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning. Have a great day.